Hello, this is Chris Ott, and I am going to demonstrate my idea visually on this white piece of paper behind me. I'm also going to explain some things that inspired this idea that I didn't mention in the history of an idea video. So this is partially an extension of that video. I thought I ought to say why I always wear a blue shirt. When I was a house painter, whenever I went and did an estimate, I always wore light blue because it's a color of trust, and it has a slight psychological impact, I think. And also, blue is the color at the top of Baba's flag, which represents the highest level of purity. And so I like it. What I didn't mention when I just talked about the history of the idea that I've been presenting is I didn't mention the influence of a period of my life where I was a filmmaker. And that's a very important part. I can't believe I forgot to include it. I started out in animation when I was in college, and I moved to California and then worked at an animation studio that was working on a film for 2 years, and I was camera assistant. And as a camera assistant, I got, my job had to do with lenses. And loading film and changing lenses, and also doing tests with different filters. So I was going to talk about lenses for a moment because I realize most people don't know very much about them, and we're not going to get technical. I was never a DP, meaning a director of photography. I just did what I was told. My job was to keep the cameras loaded and the right lens on them, and the lenses cleaned. Now, a lens is a very interesting metaphor when talking about perception, because what people don't realize is how much a lens affects what we could say the camera sees, but what we really mean is it affects the shape of the light as it hits the plane, the focal plane, which we don't need to get too technical. But also, it's good to know that a ordinary lens that goes on a camera is more than really one lens. It's many of them all lined up. If you look down, you can't really see that, but that's the way it is. It takes several lenses to bend the light this way and that to get your final effect, and that's why these are called compound lenses. So that's important to know. The other thing is the application of filters, filtration. Filtration can go on a light source, or it can go directly on the lens of a camera. This is a neutral density filter, or ND filter. All it does is it makes the image darker. But there are a lot of other filters, such as diffusion, and people used to, in the old days, they used to actually rub Vaseline on a lens in order to make a woman, so you couldn't see like her pores, you know. It diffused what you saw. And then of course you can actually change the contour of the image significantly with lens. But we won't go into that. A little like a funny mirror. That's how they were able to achieve super wide screen anamorphic lenses that took a lot of information wide, and they squeezed it into the shape of the film frame. And then on another lens that's the opposite on the projector, they spread it back out again. So that's a little like a funny mirror. I also was an independent filmmaker. This Unique was a camera that I used in the 80s, the mid 80s, in New York City and a little in LA. And I filmed Bow with this, and I also worked on a movie of my own with Patrick Myers, a playwright there, and shooting on the streets of New York. Shot a significant amount with this. And the lenses on this camera are changed like that. And it's interesting I still have this. It's in terrible shape. But what's interesting about this camera is in the 80s I told my parents I needed a camera. We didn't have money like that. So my mom got on the phone and she contacted the Sufis in Washington, and we got this sent to us. And this camera, I don't remember who owned it, and my mother's too old now to tell me. Filmed Mayor Baba in the 1950s. So that's a kind of a nice heirloom there. Now, the subject of lenses doesn't end with cameras. It's also has its opposite effect when you go to project movies. A projector also has a lens. And when I was originally developing my idea, I used both, I referred to seeing things, a lens that changes how you perceive things, okay? But I also talked about, in the same breath, the camera, the lens or filter that could change the image on a screen when you projected the light. So one of these uses light as a metaphor for perception, and the other one doesn't use a metaphor at all. When I talk about perceiving a certain way, that's not really a metaphor. I literally mean perceiving. But when I would use the metaphor of a projector, there were certain reasons that I did that. Now, one of the jobs that I had when I was a camera assistant was that when the dailies came back each night, which was the filming from the day before from the lab, my job was to project it for the company, including the director and the crew. And so I was also a projectionist. And there's some interesting things about a projector. I don't think most people would realize it, but if you were to knock out the lens on a projector with a hammer, you wouldn't just get the movie stop and it would have white light on the screen. The room would go black. Now the reason is because the lens is what gives the light direction toward the screen. It shapes the light in that direction. Without a lens on a projector, the light simply scatters and diffuses inside of the projector. It would have no way to escape in any clear direction, or possibly, not, for the most part, not escape the housing of the projector at all. I find that interesting because Baba says in Infinite Intelligence that when all the sanskars are removed, which are analogous to the lenses, nothing is seen. Okay? Nothing is projected, nothing is seen. Maybe I'll talk about this more at a later time, but right now I want to get straight away and draw my idea on this paper behind me. I'm going to use black when I'm drawing an eye, and which always represents perception itself. It never represents an eye. It's a symbol, all right? Like a letter is a symbol. Okay, so hopefully, let's see where we can begin to see. Let's start right here. So let's start with our eye. All my charts always begin with this symbol. Now, the way I'm going to describe this today, this is an eye looking this way, in case that's not clear. Try this marker. This one's might be better. Okay. Okay. It's an eye. It's looking this way. All right. In the beginning, I say, in my original book, there was just perception. Perception is a abstract noun for an action. That means it's a verbal noun, like the act is to perceive. He perceives. That's an action. When we talk about perception, it's a noun for that act. So it's sort of like he acts, and the noun for the act of acting is I guess it's action or acting. All right. Now, originally there's nothing but perception, but I say originally, and I'm going to qualify this as we reach the end. We're going to come back, and we're going to discover some things coming in the opposite direction. It's going to be interesting. Okay, I don't mean there was anything or one that was perceiving. That comes much further this way, okay? There's no doer of the act of perceiving, and nothing is perceived. Therefore, if we had, usually when we talk about a perceiving or any action, you have that which is doing it, okay? So Joe Schmo, and this is an orange, okay? And that's what he sees. This is called, in philosophy of any action, this is or in grammar also, English, this is the subject, this is the object, and this is the verb, okay? I'm only interested in the verb, okay? These will come up, get created by what happens to this verb, okay? Now, how do you change a verb? An action that someone does. We change how it is done. So let's say that there's a bear, and he's riding a bicycle in a circus, okay? All right, there's the bear, and he's riding a bicycle in the circus. He's riding, okay? We don't care about the bicycle or the bear, we care about the riding. Now, he can ride slow, and he could ride fast. And those would be differences in how he rides. But it wouldn't add anything else, any other object or entity to his riding. Riding is riding, whether it's slow or fast, okay? Similarly, perception is perception, whether perception occurs one way or another. We'll talk about what we mean by ways of perceiving, okay? How you look upon something is, we are sort of adding an adverb to the verb perceiving. Okay, whenever a way of seeing is introduced into the system, we use the metaphor of a lens. Okay? When I look through this lens, this is an AMB filter, neutral density. Everything I perceive is darkened by about one stop. Okay, so it's about half as bright, everything I see. I, however, don't change. Just subjectively, the world apparently changes for me. Okay, similarly, when I add a lens to perception, let's start up here. Let's say I'm adding a lens. I'm going to use, this is the symbol. It's a lens. Again, it's like a letter. I don't mean there's any lenses anywhere. All this does is it represents a way of seeing. Okay? When I introduce something, it will affect all that is seen. And if there's nothing to see, it will potentially change anything that could ever come along to be seen. Okay? Now, like the neutral density filter, but it will not affect the seeing itself, really. Seeing or perceiving, or perception, I should say, remains inviolate. Okay. Without introducing Mayor Baba's language, I'm going to use my original language because it's very pure and it's very good to get it this way before you start bringing in ideas that that are kind of Mayor Baba's doctrines. Instead, we're just going to look at this, what starts out as a theory, okay? And when these lenses, let's say that in the beginning before there was a world, there was just perceiving, but there was no one doing the perceiving, and there was nothing to perceive, nothing perceived. But then, an incident, which we won't get into right now, why it happened, created a first way of seeing. Not something seen, but a first way of seeing. So it created a lens. This lens is purely imaginary. It's an imaginary way of perceiving. Just like if I decide to, stake out a country and there's a line on the ground, I draw a line on the ground and I say, that's going to be the border of my country. Well, that's an imaginary border, right? I'm imagining it there. All these are imagination. This is a funny thing about these lenses. They're all kind of like that. They're seeing something as something else. And that way is imaginary. This first lens is time. Time was originally a way of perceiving, and it was necessary that it be the first way of perceiving, because if there hadn't been, nothing could have followed it, any other lenses, because there would be no time for there to be a separation. So once there's time, there is time to add another way of seeing, and that is space. Now, there's nothing to see temporally or spatially, but originally perceived initially temporally and then immediately after spatially. But this is important, that nothing was perceived, because nothing can even be, you wouldn't be able to conceive it, anything that wasn't in time or space. So it's not like there could be anything before these. That would be kind of irrational if you think about it, because that, whatever that was, would have to not occur in time and not take up any space. So what could it be? Okay. Out of time and space, you get divisions, or plurality, I say. And various kinds of plurality, or duality. And out of duality, we can have numbers, okay? But they're not numbers like we look at them today. These are just symbols. But the actual pure, what I call pure relations. There are pure relations, and they're relations between time and space. Now, once you have time and space, and plurality and number, you can then have the laws of nature, because the laws of nature are really complex equations made up of ratios between time and space. Let's just take one of these, gravity. Gravity is a determinable motion of objects toward the center of the Earth going at a particular amount of time. It's a ratio of space and time. If an object is falling 30 feet per second, which is dropped from the Eiffel Tower or something like that, which being caused by gravity, that is a ratio of time and space. If I'm driving 60 miles an hour, the time is the hour and the space is the 60 miles. Okay, so all motion is ratios of time and space. So these are only possible when you first have these. Now, originally, these are laws with nothing to govern, okay? Again, this was time and space with nothing to be temporal and nothing to be spatial. But you have to have the laws of nature to have objects that can be governed. It's kind of, if you think about it, it can't work the other way. You can't have, you can't have an atom. Let's just take an atom in a very crude, I'm not going to get into it, but let's say we have an atom and we've got this electron moving around it, okay? And let's say it's got maybe it's an atom like that. Now these have to stick together, and this has to stay, and this has to move at this speed, and it also has to not collapse and in on the nucleus of the atom. So the atom requires all the laws. In fact, I would say that the atom is nothing but the laws. The atom exists in a mathematical state describing locations in a coordinate system and motions and nothing else. Now, say similarly with a planet. Say we have a planet here. How could you have a planet without gravity first? Because it's gravity that takes particles and atoms and brings them together, okay, to form a planet. So you actually, the gravity is necessary to make the planet. So the idea of a world without these laws is irrational. Okay, sorry, this is in the way. I shouldn't have done that. Okay, once we have, well, maybe I should have. But anyway, no, this should be down here or something. Now, once we have the laws of nature, we can have nature. Because the nature, I posit, is simply what I just described. It's mathematical, and it's governed by law. And it evolves by law in its inorganic state. So for instance, when I'm talking about inorganic, you originally have these gases, and they're cool and consolidate into hard bodies, and then because it gets cooler, certain vapor falls as water to the surface of the planet, and then that flows by gravity toward the sea, and all that. So you could have quite a world simply describable in terms of mathematical locations and motions. And those locations would be in some law-obeying coordinate system, and those motions would all be the laws of nature. But it wouldn't be a world that you could perceive or hear or smell, because there would be no noses or ears or eyes. You couldn't taste anything because there would be no taste buds, and there would be no brain to process those things. So those would be meaningless in the original inorganic world. This inorganic world was colorless, tasteless, silent. It was purely mental, in the sense that mathematics is mental. It's a world that exists mathematically, and that's the inorganic world. We'll just call that the inorganic world. And it evolves, but I'm just going to put some numbers here that don't really mean anything, okay? All right. And we should be able to add geometry too, but only in a, not a visual sense, but in a conceptual sense, because there is a certain amount of geometry, even to the way gravity operates once things get evolved to a certain point. For instance, the Earth is round. Okay. Inorganic world. Now, when we get to the inorganic world, all these lenses that have come along, these are mathematical lenses, to produce it, okay? These are the lenses that produce the phenomenon, and the phenomenon would be the inorganic world. That is what is produced. Just like these lenses produce gravity, okay? Or such and such. Okay, all this evolution has been an evolution of ways of perceiving from the vantage point of a single point. But I'm not going to say from the vantage of a percipient, because you'll see why when we get here. We'll see what a percipient really is. It's the vantage, we can have a little, let's just say it's the vantage of perception itself. Okay, there's no individuals here, at least as I see it. I don't see any possibility for there to be, for instance, there's this grain of sand, inorganic grain of sand, and it's got a life going on. I also think that wouldn't make sense, because what happens when that grain of sand, gets split in two, Now suddenly that's like two individuals. So I see individuality beginning in this evolution from here, at the juncture between the inorganic, which means not alive, and the organic. Okay. Let's say that at this point, these lenses, which have created all this matter, you could say, in the sense of mathematical sense, and located clusters of potential. These come together to form a first little amoeba of some sort. Okay. Now, when this little amoeba forms, it has some kind of nervous system. And that's what makes the difference. Even a plant, I would say, has sort of a rudimentary nervous system. It has a certain amount of awareness of its environment, and that's why it responds to it. It'll send its roots where nutrients have been found in the past, okay? It will turn toward the sun. And you could say those are just mechanical, but it's how you look upon it. They're instincts, but they do show some kind of nervous system. And at this point, this body becomes a focal, a focal point for a certain amount of individual consciousness. And I've always had a hard time explaining this. But from the point, as soon as there can be holding on to the memory of the past in some way, which I don't think happens with sand and nebulas, but as soon as you have a nervous system, you have the capacity to hold on to gathering information, gathering experience, memories. And we call these memories lenses too, okay? So this piece of grub is moving through the earth or, through the mud. It's gathering certain sensations, and those sensations are remembered or stored by its nervous system. Now, when the grub dies, okay, we don't know. I want to show you that there's no literal soul thing, okay? Because there's not going to be anything but perception in this system. these persist. These impressions from the life of a grub, and we could call that in Baba's language, we could call that a subtle body, but I don't believe in a body. I just believe they are the memories themselves. They're retained, but because they require, there's a complicated thing in Baba's teaching that is presumed by me, and that's why it's hard for me to explain the system. If you read God Speaks, you'll get what I'm trying to convey. When a grub has certain experiences, those experiences need to be balanced by opposite experiences, which he explains why that is. And this necessitates to have certain corollary opposite experiences. It has to forge a new medium. Okay? This is what creates new forms in evolution. And when I say form, I literally mean a different shape. So, going from a grub like this, and now we go to a grub with these little wings, okay? It's a different shape. Okay? It takes on a more advanced media to experience the residue of impressions from the previous experience as that grub. This is all in God Speaks. It's all in God Speaks. And it's necessary that you have that. I didn't talk about this when I wrote my first book, but it was presupposed in my own thinking. Sorry. However, there is no ghost in the machine, as they say. There's no Casper the Friendly Ghost, okay? There's no spirit, nothing like that. That would add something to perception. The only thing that's taking experience and needs to have this next experience is the single, unified perceiving. Because remember, none of these lenses ever have any effect on what's to the left. They have an effect upon the appearances or the phenomenal, that which is perceived, the apparent. It never affects reality. Therefore, this can never be divided into like two souls. That is entirely how it appears. Okay? Now, as this evolution goes on of this kind, with more and more advanced forms, so let's say this grub fell away, and you have this new form with my little wings there, and as it's exhausting those impressions, it's creating new ones. Now, other creatures, like its brothers and sisters and its relatives from 3 generations back that still look like the first grub and everything, they're acquiring their own impressions too. And then they drop off this, and then they acquire a new form, okay? So there's a bunch of these little things, but they are all this. That's what's perceiving through these. You can even say that the body itself, Mayor Baba says that these bodies that are formed are actually formed out of the matrix of these leftover impressions from the previous grub. So actually, this is a composite of lenses. Remember I showed you that a lens on a camera is called a compound lens. It's more complex than just a lens. It's many. So this body, we could say, is these previous lenses that's now consolidated. Now, as this moves forward with new species, more and more complicated. Now we got a dog here. The degree of consciousness is increasing in each form. Okay? It's getting more conscious, okay, as it moves along. Now, Mayor Baba actually says this is the very purpose of this theme, okay? This is a consciousness factory. It is the drive for greater awareness and ability to perceive reality, the truth, that is pushing evolution. You notice that materialists believe with Darwin, who got his ideas, well, we'll talk more about that. He got them from Malthus, and he also got them from Adam Smith, if I got that right, and from economists. But anyway, his thing was survival. Everything's trying to survive. That's the whole thrust of reality. But look around. Is evolution really a story of things that can survive better and better and better? No. But it is a story of things that can perceive better and better and better. And to be able to process what they perceive until they can actually even think. And then they can think in deep abstractions, in higher order concepts. That is what evolution actually can be observed to be doing. There are things in evolution that were so fragile, including our own ancestor hominids, that they disappeared completely from the earth in a very short period of time. Now eventually, you have apes, and then you have hominids, and then finally you have, a human being. All right. Okay. And all the while, this is really an evolution of ways of seeing, okay? And we follow another journey. It's not really another person's journey. They're all the journey of this. They're all the journey of this. There's only one, in Christianity, God is a person. And if we use that kind of language, we would say, well, in this system, there is only one person. And if you want to call it God, go right ahead. Well, we don't have multiple persons in that sense, but they use the word person in a kind of funny way. The three persons of the Trinity and so forth. Okay, so by the time you get here, you got lots of people, okay, and you've also got always new coming in. I'll have to talk about that later on, why you have this sort of repeating. You have these first lenses are all sustained. They never go anywhere, all right? Once they're had, as long as this eye remains open, they're there. So this creates the potential for this process to be constantly repeating, or apparently repeating. We are these apparent sojourners. Okay. So there's lots of people, but they also have dogs, because I just said there's new creatures starting out in this process, and then there's flies buzzing around the doggie's ears. Okay, so there's the master. That's supposed to be a person. All right. Nobody's alone. This is this great big, what Baba calls the advancing stream of life. Everything is advancing in consciousness, okay? And it's the advancing stream of life, just like a stream that keeps flowing to the river. Okay, we'll see what that, a river flows to the ocean, and in a minute, hopefully we'll be able to show the ocean this is all flowing to. Okay, this is for as far as I initially, no, there's more. Okay, so this is the inorganic evolution, okay? This I've always called the organic evolution, the evolution of organic living species with more and more advanced nervous systems and capacity to perceive and think. And then finally, we have in my original book what I called cultural. And I have to explain this. It's really, I took anthropology in college when I was an undergraduate, and it was broken into two classes, physical anthropology, and that was largely dedicated to these animals and these hominids in evolution, okay, from a Darwinian perspective. And then he had another class that was a little more advanced, next class in anthropology, and that was called cultural anthropology. And I did great in both. I love them. I love culture. I love culture. Culture is sort of very artificial. We could say this is a natural evolution, and we could call these lenses natural impressions, okay, or natural ways of seeing. And this we would call non-natural, but meaning they're man-made. But if you look up, the word non-natural does not mean unnatural. The word unnatural usually connotes or denotes something kind of perverse. But non-natural simply means man-made, frankly. That's what it means. It's not just a natural phenomenon. It's something that people have put together using their thinking. Now, if anything is confusing, it's this. I would have to say that you'd have to read at least the first half of Mayor Baba's book, God Speaks, the purpose and theme of creation, to really get what I was saying very briefly here. This is the first time I've tried to draw that out, okay? But I just tell you, I can't do it this quickly. That's why Mayor Baba wrote a book. If he could explain it in 15 minutes, he wouldn't have needed to. All right, so now we're going to get back to these lenses. But now we're talking about the lenses of these three people I'm going to draw, okay? All right, and then there's this guy. All right. Now, these lenses are experienced individually, but they might as well be collective, because these three people in a culture, they're going to agree upon them, okay? So the first thing that's going to be possible is that was not possible before with the hominids, for instance, is reference. So this is a lens which allows one to perceive something as a sign or signifier of something else. That's what reference is. So like, well, I say this eye is a sign or symbol for perception. Of course, this piece of paper here and this marking and this ink, in this pen, it is not perception. But I'm going to look upon this as signifying perception. Okay. So, this ability to see one thing as referring to another allows for the possibility of simple language. But it only allows for verbs and nouns, simple, like Joey wants a popsicle. Joey wants to go with mom to the popsicle store. Okay, that's all. But he can't come up with higher order concepts, which I have to get to, like, the idea of I have a right to go with mommy to the store because of the laws, or something like that, or because of natural law. I should have that freedom, or freedom itself. That's a good example of a higher order thought. You can't have that simply by looking at this, as representing freedom, because you'll never find any freedom anywhere. So a simple creature wouldn't be able to understand what you're talking about. So that requires what's called meaning. This is not original. Reference and meaning is what makes language possible. So this is where a word is seen, a word, which is a sign, is seen as a reference to many other signs, which in turn have reference, and etc. It becomes much more complicated and multi-layered. It's like playing, three-dimensional chess here, when you have reference and meaning. Once you have reference and meaning, well, let's start with reference. You are able to name things. And once, let's call this person Fred. Once Fred has a name, Fred's whole personality changes. It's true. Fred starts to define that word, Fred. I am Fred. Fred is the man that lives up the hill and is married to Wilma. And we have a child. Fred has a child named Bam Bam. I am Fred. Okay. But the name is necessary because we don't define ourselves. That wouldn't really make any sense. We define the word that refers to us. Okay, and that's how we just think of ourselves. Sort of like, it's an intermediary. All these characteristics that I ascribe to myself, they belong to Chris Ott. And then I go, yeah, Chris Ott, what's that? Oh, yeah, that's me. All right. Now, once he has more full, complicated language, and he can even decide things like, I am rich, I am better educated, I'm smarter than the people in my village, I am superior spiritually to them, okay? All kinds of things that he can now define about himself. And this is able to create all these cultural distinctions, like rich, poor, debonair. If somebody came from another planet and they found the person who thought he was debonair, the guy might have a hard time explaining what he meant to the guy from the other planet. Okay, so what's the debonair? So the guy would start pointing out, signs of his debonairness, but the guy from the other planet would be kind of confused about what this higher order concept is. But the culture is made of them. You're a slave, you have no rights. I am aristocracy, born into it, born into these privileges and all kinds of things. So you get a big, complicated culture, which is makes life more fun. More fun. Okay. Now, once you have, I just said that once you have reference, you can have simple nouns for things, and nouns for even actions, okay? Like riding a bike, we can talk about that. Once you have meaning, you go, he's a world champion bike rider because he has a gift. It's a gift. And a gift is kind of a higher order idea. But to have really high, the highest order concepts, like that we create governments out of, and laws and mathematics, and we discover the Pythagorean theorem and stuff like that, requires something else. Because you see, to develop very higher order concepts, like very complex systems of mathematics, like just Euclidean geometry or algebra, okay, which the Greeks discovered, or the Romans. You have that, no one can sit down and do that and teach it to their students in a given lifetime. That takes many great minds working from the earlier stages of an idea by their predecessors, and that requires writing books. If you don't have books, you cannot have higher order concepts, okay? You cannot have mathematics, because books allow generations of the smartest people in a culture to develop an idea to a very high level. Now, as these are all being developed, these people shared them, okay? So it's as if they're all looking through one cultural lens. That's their culture. The world looks like that. They think that those people really are Brahmins, and those really are untouchables, you see. However, notice I left one out right here. He's a iconoclast. He chose not to agree with one. Okay. Now, once we have these higher order concepts, as I say, we can have mathematics, all right? Now, once you have higher order concepts and higher order mathematics, and higher order logic, you can have computers, okay? Now, a lot of people don't know this, but we could not have created the computers with the mathematics that we had at the turn of the 20th century. We could not have done it with the mathematics or the logic, oh, sorry, I went back too far, that existed at the time of Aristotle. Aristotle had a very simple kind of logic, and they had a simple mathematics too. And everything was simpler. But at the turn of the 20th century, you had enormous breakthroughs. One of them is the book Mathematica Principia, which was published in 1903, I think, by Alfred Whitehead and Bertrand Russell. That book brought mathematics and logic to a higher level. It wasn't a perfect book, but it was one of the necessary preconditions for the kind of thinking that made computers possible around the time of the World War II and right after. Okay? And through computers, we have, of course, so many other lenses, we can't even get into it. Now we have, how we see the world is getting really strange. We can't even keep up with it. Okay, now I want to go backward because I want to show, now, I should say, this point, Meher Baba has a whole other journey, okay? He has he's referring to this journey in his, what he calls evolution. And he refers to this journey in what he calls reincarnation, meaning your human lives, and to acquire all these various lenses from your experiences that are retained between lives. They're not remembered, but they affect how you look upon things later. And then he has another whole other, if I could wrap in a whole other piece of paper, it's called involution. So if that's evolution, this is involution. It's the returning. If evolution is evolving out, involution is turning around and involving in back to realization of yourself as the original one. Okay? This is really strange. But you'll get that if you read God Speaks by Meher Baba. I'm not going to go into it because that is not what a philosopher does. They don't spend a lot of time explaining the doctrines of somebody based on the authority of somebody who has a different experience from themselves. Meher Baba, if he's not a quack or crank, he has a different experience from me. And I don't want to pretend to have that one. Okay, this is my own thinking, and I can articulate it with a good conscience. That this is what I believe is true. It is my understanding of even the words of other people, what they meant. But this is a great simplification of it. And I mean that in a positive sense. Simplification as in getting to the core by throwing off extraneous, unnecessary, theoretical, causal things that I don't personally believe in. All right, I simply have now, I account for the entire world, including our cultural world and things like laws and stuff that are man-made. I account for all of it simply by one principle alone, the perceptual schema, which I liken to a lens. Okay? That's actually the simplest theory that's ever been proposed, and I believe it's true. Now I'm going to explain why I think it's true. We all have an intuition that we have not celebrated in philosophy, but it's in all of us, and it's time we wake up and realize we have it, because it's really important, and it's been sitting there sort of unused. An intuition is something that we all know, but we don't know how we know it. It's just something we're born knowing, but sometimes somebody has to point it out to you in yourself, and then you'll look. Reflection or introspection is often portrayed as somebody looking up to the left. You look inside, you're looking up in your brain, and you look and you go, oh yeah, that's true. But you might have never noticed. Okay, so this is this. It's called, there are necessary preconditions for things. When I say necessary, I mean absolutely necessary. Some things cannot exist before the things that are necessary for it to exist. All right, I'm going to show this now and you'll get what I mean. For computers to exist, there has to be higher order mathematics. For higher order mathematics, there has to be books. For there to be books, you have to have reference and meaning. And language. Did I leave that out? I don't think it was obvious. That reference and meaning gives you language, which gives you all, culture. Culture is built out of language. Now, you can't have reference and meaning without, you can't have meaning without the lens of reference. You wouldn't be able to understand it. And now, you wouldn't be able to have this if you didn't have a human brain. And you wouldn't be able to have a human brain unless you had gone through this evolution of a human brain and had these lesser developed brains. And you wouldn't be able to have a form, which is a shape. Okay, let's say this is your form and you're a grub. Okay, there's your eye and there's your mouth. Okay, that's still a shape. Yeah, I could do that with geometry, You can't have a shape without time and space and the laws of nature and etc. You couldn't have a body without the laws of nature. What would you be if you had, your atoms couldn't hold together and there was no planet because there's nothing to pull the planet together to be a planet, or the air from floating away. So there had to be this inorganic evolution. So we couldn't have gravity unless we had space. Because, gravity is things falling. See, falling, well, you can't really fall if there's no space, from here to here. And you can't have space unless there's time, because you need time to conceive of the imaginary dimension of space. And you can't have any of these imagined things, unless you have perception. Now I'm going to define perception. Perception includes the capacity to imagine and perceive what one imagines. If you didn't have that, you wouldn't be able to perceive anything. Okay. Now, it's possible that I could just stop here and then continue another day. And that's what I'm going to do, because I'm not prepared to do much more. But I do want to say one more thing. I'll say it here because I can remember it. The rest I need time to think about what I want to say. when I get back here now with this new thinking, well, first of all, because each of these things has necessary preconditions, and again, by necessary, I mean absolutely essential, the world could not have evolved any other way, okay? I explain this, it'll be in my new book, and it's in my Talks with Kerry series, but you pull these out and you wouldn't be able to perceive a world, okay? So there cannot be a world that was, this world that we live in had to take these steps because these were necessary preconditions, okay? And then they have necessary preconditions and so forth. So when I come back to perception, I'm just going to add 2 more necessary preconditions. And it doesn't go back any further, so it doesn't, I don't want to freak anybody out. But let's see, if I run out of space here, I hope not. Anyway, I won't draw that, I'll just say, a necessary precondition for perception, and I only realized this in the last year, a necessary precondition for perception is consciousness. You would not be able to perceive if you were not conscious. If you're in deep sleep, you cannot perceive anything. You have to be conscious to perceive. So consciousness is a necessary precondition of perceiving. It's not another thing, and it's not a lens. It's part of that we're just going back more to the original and essential, and more to what we would later we're going to talk about in a more spiritual way, but not spiritual in the way you're used to, like spirits. We mean it. You'll see. But there's also a necessary precondition for consciousness, and that is intelligence. Now let's stop there. Let's stop there. Because I'm tired, and as anybody can see, I have a breathing disorder. It's hard to do this work. But this is my gift to future generations. I think this is going to be very important, and I don't have any expectation of hardly anybody realizing that while I'm alive, and that's fine with me. I have been given this wonderful opportunity, this space, this camera, these lights and so forth, and this microphone, all this, so that I can present this, because it's part of what was destined to be. And I appreciate whoever's watching this, and I hope you have a great day. And when I have more energy, I'll continue. Thank you very much.